Welcome to this Product Hive event. Usually we have these in person, but we weren't even planning to have a November event this month because of holidays. But we were lucky enough to get Keisha here to do a virtual event. She actually lives in Boston. Um, just announcing future events, unless we decide to do something last minute. This will be the last event of the year due to the holidays and whatnot. So yeah, just wanted to thank you, all you guys who have been coming to our events. After COVID, there was kind of a bit of a dead zone where we weren't having events frequently enough. But we bounced back since then. This year we've literally had an event every month. So just wanted to say thank you to all the attendees, venue hosts, speakers, sponsors, who've made it possible. So yeah, like I said, the last event of the year. This will most likely be the last event of the year, and we'll pick up back in January, and those details will be announced. In this event, Keisha will be discussing how to craft user personas, and we'll review examples of how they can be used in practice. Keisha has 10 years of product experience, most recently working as a senior PM, focused on mobile app experience and product-led growth strategies. So let's all give her a warm welcome or a product hive buzz to Keisha. Sorry, that was terrible. All right, Keisha, on to you.
Wow. That was fun. I wasn't expecting that. Well, thank you, Nick, for that welcome. And again, yes, I'm Keisha. And today we will be covering user personas. So just a quick overview of what we'll talk today. I'll give a little intro on myself. We'll do a short icebreaker, nothing too wild, so don't feel like, oh, I want to drop off. I don't want to do an icebreaker. I know they're sometimes a little weird, but it's fine. This one won't be too much. And then I'll get into a bit about personas, just an overview of what they are and then how they can be used in practice. And I'll go through a real life example that I've used in the past, and then we'll open it up for questions. So also feel free to drop questions in the chat if you have them along the way. That's totally fine. So for starters, I like to give a little bit of a user manual for kind of a product feel to it for an intro. So again, like I said, my name is Keisha. I am based in Boston, was born and raised. But fun fact, I have been to Utah about 15 times. And that's just because I worked for Pluralsight, which many of you may be familiar with as a Utah-based company. So have been over on that side of the country quite a few times. But a little bit about my background. I went to business school and I went for a sports business, thinking that I was most certainly going to work in the front office of a professional sports team. That, spoiler alert, did not happen. But during my time there, I also served a year with City Year. And City Year is a national nonprofit focused on supporting education in K through 12 in some of the tougher school districts in the United States. So having that opportunity really kind of changed my perspective on the education system. And I think those combining, a business background with this experience in the classroom kind of shaped where I ended up in my career and just personal endeavors. So like I said, now I'm a product manager. I have worked in ed tech. I've also worked in fintech and SaaS. So I've kind of been in all of the places. But again, wanting to continue the work in education. So I have tutored in the past, and I've also published some product management courses just in an effort to help other people upskill in their journey. I also every week work with the local food pantry to box at least 250 boxes of food for families. So that's at least 500 to 1,000 people who can eat out from those 250 boxes plus boxes each week. So just some ways, again, to kind of continue that service work and also do my regular job. So that's a little bit about me and how I got here. So our icebreaker for today, because again, I mentioned that I've been to Utah several times and probably will go back. I'm curious to know, what is your favorite Salt Lake City area restaurant? And if you're not familiar with any, feel free to just give me a Utah one in general and tell me why I should go to that place in Utah. But again, given Product Hive is Utah based, and I've been there a bunch of times, I'm curious to know what your favorite restaurant is. So feel free to start dropping them in the chat. And I will say, for me, my favorite is Maza on 9th and 9th. They have, every time I go to Utah, I must make a trip to Maza. I think they have wonderful food. Oh, Valters, I've been there. Yep, I've been to that one. Red Iguana also have been there. I'm feeling like a real Utah person, having actually known these restaurants. That's great. The Bohemian, haven't been to that one yet. Haven't heard of it. Copper Onion, yes, have, and Eva. Wow, I feel like I really know these places. You guys are making me feel like I know what I'm talking about. From Vancouver. Okay, try meat in Yaletown. Okay, great. Maza's closed. Sad. Thank you, Hannah, for letting me know that. Great. Woodbine Food Hall. Never been over there. Nice. Well, thanks everyone for participating in the icebreaker. I will certainly be noting some of those restaurants that I have not been to yet. The other one, they do have another one on 15th. Yes, they do have another one. Yes, so I'm glad at least one of them is still open. Cool. Great. Well, thanks for participating. Just a quick icebreaker to get everyone going. And then we'll jump right into it here. So first, what is personas? That's kind of what we're here for today. So personas are, as far as product development go, it's some sort of profile or representation of your target customer. So it's not necessarily to say that it's a specific person necessarily, but it is a representation of a real person, a generalized view of their pains, their needs, and their goals. Oftentimes you'll see you'll have to have interviewed several customers in order to be able to put together these personas. When we've done it, I've done it in the past. Several could be different for each company. Several could be 10, several could be 50. It really depends on how the depth that you're trying to get to in your persona, and how much information you're able to gather from each of the people that you speak with. One of the things I would say is one of the key reasons that we need personas is to help create a shared understanding of who it is that we're solving for. It's not helpful if the PM has one idea of who the customer is, and maybe the designer has another idea, and engineering has, again, something entirely different. That's not helpful when moving as a unit towards building a product, a feature, enhancement, whatever it may be. So teams will sometimes have these personas as they're creating new experiences as the way to anchor everyone to the same understanding. Excuse me. Slides. So here I have an example. And again, this is an example of what a persona could look like. Personas can come in many shapes, sizes, flavors, outlines, formats. I've seen several. I looked up some on Google just before as I was putting this presentation together, and I was like, wow, so many formats. The format really doesn't matter so long as you're able to gather the information that you need. The goal of any persona, regardless of what it looks like or how it's structured, if it has pictures, if it's just words, the goal is really to clearly identify the meaningful aspects of that customer's profile that will help you then identify opportunities later. So here again, I put together a very lightweight one, and this persona here, really, again, it's just identifying some of the demographics around this person. This was one that I did for a dating app. So if you were on whatever, name a dating app, this could be a persona for that. So again, a male, 32 years old, and is a finance analyst. Just again, to get kind of a general idea of who we're talking about here and some of their goals and motivations. Again, their goals could be financial freedom. They are a financial analyst, they work a lot, they make a lot of money potentially, but also their goals are to get married and settle down. And so you'll notice here that there could be many goals, and the goals don't necessarily have to be aligned specifically to my feature, right? Like the fact that they want to make a lot of money isn't necessarily directly impacting the dating app profile, but it is an important factor that's playing into the whole person here. And then on the other side of that, I listed out some pain points that this person might have. So their work schedule doesn't really allow for them to have a social life. If they're working 60, 70 hours potentially a week, that might not leave a lot of time for for going out and socializing. Another pain point could be that public transportation isn't very reliable in their area, and maybe if they don't have a car, it could be difficult for them to get out. And then lastly, like, this person could be shy. They are not very social. They don't necessarily naturally step out of their comfort zone to go speak to other people. So that could be something that's hindering them as well. And then some of the behavior, some of the things that are key to note about this person. Maybe they're very tech savvy. Again, they're very comfortable using social media, using different apps. They can navigate their way through a smartphone very, very well. They might spend a lot of time in a coffee shop and reading books. Then their way to, get out and enjoy themselves when their hobbies could be exercising. So again, these are just aspects of this person that are going to be relevant to potentially to the app that we're building, if assuming we're building some sort of dating app here. So this could be a way to pull together some information. You might, again, pull together information about how much this person makes. You might pull together information about, who else is in their environment that they might interact with. So there's very many different ways that you can go about developing your persona and what the information that is included. But this was just one quick example. I threw a name in here. This name is entirely fictitious. This picture is literally AI driven. This is not necessarily a real person. But again, it's a representation of who I'm building for. And that's what's important for when I'm starting working with my team to understand, hey, how do we anchor to a similar understanding of who we're building for? And this is one of the ways to do that. So moving on to a real life example, while I was at Help Scout, we developed personas pretty early on in the time that I was there to help us have a better understanding of who our mobile app user was. So when I started, the product really lacked, the product being the mobile app product, kind of lacked strategy around what we should be building, who we were building for, when was the right time to be building features, should we be going for parity with web, should we be doing something different? There wasn't really much of a strategy. But one of the things that I noticed is that we didn't really have a great understanding of who we were even building for. So that makes it very difficult to know then what we should be building. So I started this, kind of a bit of a project with the designer and said, hey, let's just start talking to customers and build out a persona, see who we're building for, what do they need, where should we be going? Because none of us are really clear on what's even going on. So essentially what we did is that we combined both qualitative customer research with some usage analytics that we had gathered internally to develop a very holistic view of who the persona was. So that actually turned into not one persona, but two. And so in doing our customer research, we realized there were two very distinct use cases and two ultimately distinct personas that we should be building for and we should be keeping in mind as we were building. And so we came up with these names, Robin and Marvin. They, again, entirely made up names, entirely made up people. The names and the faces don't really matter, but what they represent did matter for our team. And so what we did, screens here. Sorry. Seems I'm a little frozen here. Okay, sorry. So what we what we ended up doing was we created a bit of a biography, and we gave this person a story. And again, this was a realistic example. So you'll notice that this looks quite a bit different than the persona that I presented before. Again, the format doesn't matter. It's really about getting the information that's most relevant to you and your team about the customer that you're building for. So Robin here for us was the customer support manager. So this was a person who maybe used to work in the queue responding to questions. And actually, let me back up a bit. Help Scout's mobile app product is for customer support. So where an agent would be responding to customers as they wrote in about whatever issue it was. Hey, what's my order number? Where's my delivery? That type of stuff. So what we found in doing this research is that we had this one persona, which was the customer service manager, the person who kind of oversaw the dealings of the team, what was going on. They were probably a people manager. They used to maybe work the queue, but now they don't. But one of the things that they do enjoy about the Help Scout product is that we share the same affinity for customers as they do. We're very customer focused, making sure that customers feel supported, that they're not just a ticket in the queue, but they're actually a conversation. And that's how these people also thought about their customers. So we put a quote here also, I'm passionate about providing best in class support for my team. And that might have been like a paraphrasing of something that we heard from an actual person, but this kind of gave a rounded out view of who this person was. And then we started understanding more about what this person's needs were. So the first thing that we noticed is that they're not really interested in responding to specific conversations in the queue. They're actually more interested in understanding how the queue is performing, the overall health of the queue. So they talk to us a lot about reporting and understanding, the average response time, or, the customer satisfaction rates from the responses that they got. How many conversations was each person getting through in the queue? They wanted a view over all the mailboxes. They might have, 3 or 4 within their team. So what's going on across all of those rather than a specific conversation? And then finally, they wanted to enable their team to do work however it worked best for them. So if that meant they were working from a mobile device, then so be it. They want that to be an option, but it doesn't have to be mandatory. And so those are some of the things that we saw from the customer support manager profile. We then also saw that there was this customer support person, the representative, and we call this person Marvin. And this person is really answering those day-to-day questions. They care about, how quickly did they get back to this one particular customer? Did they give that specific customer a great answer? Sometimes this person might also not even be a customer support person. They might be an engineer in the company, and just might have the product is very technical, and they find themselves in the conversation queue often. So it wasn't necessarily just the customer support person, but it's other people who respond very directly to customers on a regular basis. This person, they wanted the flexibility to be able to respond wherever they are. Sometimes they might be, out for a walk. They might be at the grocery store. They might, have to go to their child's sporting event, and they want to be able to check back in and make sure that they're not missing any conversations while they're working or while they're doing potentially other things. So being very efficient is important to them, making sure that they're getting things done quickly, etc. And again, here we just pulled another quote: speed, efficiency, and convenience are key for me. So those are some of the themes that we were hearing from this particular user profile. And then again, their needs. So we had drafted out needs for the customer support manager. We had also drafted out the needs that we were hearing generally from the customer support representative. And this person, again, they need to be able to move very quickly through the app wherever they are. They can't, be stuck over here and then take 17 clicks to get out and get into a different mailbox. They need to be able to navigate quickly. They want to be able to customize things so that they can move quickly as things make sense for them, organize their folders in a way that works for them, tag conversations in a way that works for them, be able to just find efficiencies wherever they can, because there could potentially be a lot of conversations coming through the queue, and they don't want to be slowed down by not being able to find things. Again, flexibility in their schedule. So many people are working remotely now. COVID has kind of changed the way that people work and how we think about workplace flexibility. So this is, again, something that's very important to this person. one of the huge things that we heard from customers was access to their customers' data. And so one of the things that was lacking in the mobile app, which we heard as a constant pain, was, hey, I would use the app more if I actually had access to my customers' information. So when someone writes in and says, hey, what's my order number? In the mobile app, you couldn't figure that out. And so it would require them to either have to hold on that conversation or go back to a desktop in order to find that information and then respond to that person. And by that point, you're not going to go back to your mobile device. You're just going to respond directly on your desktop. So accessing customers' information was very important. And something that we took away was one of the big things that we took away from this research is how do we enable people to get more of this information so that they can respond from their mobile app. And then the last thing that we heard is that a lot of people use the app because they weren't finding too much value in actually responding. They were using it instead to kind of do some cleanup and triage. So again, they couldn't respond, but maybe they could delete a bunch of old conversations, or they could reorganize things into different folders. That was something they could do to kind of save time. Maybe they were on the train and they were just, tagging conversations so that when they got into the office and had more access to information, they would be able to hit the ground running when they got into the office. So that was one thing where they were finding value in it. Even if they couldn't respond, they were able to do some of this cleanup and triage through the mobile app. So that was the initial qualitative research that we did. And most of the research up until that point had been fully derived from things that we heard from customers. But we also wanted to get a fuller picture of what they were dealing with. And so we started to dig into some of the data. And these are things that you can't necessarily find out from customers. All of your information is not things that people can tell you. Sometimes it's about looking at the data and seeing what additional insights you can gather from there. So first we started by looking at user geography. And again, we didn't really have necessarily a hypothesis to say there was or wasn't going to be a difference. It was just something that we thought to look at. Might there be a difference in usage across geographies? And so what we saw is that the vast majority of our users were based in the US, and then the remaining four here made up the top 65 to 70% of all traffic. And so that's interesting. But is it? And so what we did, we also started to compare this with web, because if there was a material difference between what we saw in geography usage on mobile versus web, then this would mean something. But we saw this was essentially the same behaviors that we were seeing on web, where most of our customers were US based, and the next four were literally the same next four as far as population that we would see on web. So this really didn't tell us much. It just confirmed that we were seeing kind of the same usage behaviors across mobile and web. Where we did start seeing some differences is when we started looking at company size. So again, here we saw about 47 to 50% of our mobile app users were companies of 1 to 3 employee size, which was vastly different than we saw on web, where this number was probably closer to like 25%. And so that was actually a meaningful difference in that we're seeing more of our users on mobile are with smaller companies. And what we realize is that there's actually a reason why behind this. And so smaller teams, we found, tend to have less around the clock support. And so therefore they need to be able to access their conversations, at 7 p.m. or 7 a.m., whatever time it is, because they don't have necessarily a 24/7 support team that's globally distributed. So they are the support team all the time. So again, when we have smaller teams, you have less people. And so therefore we see more usage on mobile than we do potentially on these 11 plus team sizes, where those teams tended to actually have more support, or they at the time zones that they spanned were a bit wider than these 1 to 3s. And so they didn't necessarily have to say, oh, I have to go out to the grocery store, I must be available. They may actually have a teammate who is online and available, and they don't have to do that. So this was an area where we did see the numbers were actually meaningful because they were actually quite different than we saw for web users. So again, it's in these instances, it's not necessarily, if the 47% seems large here, yes, is that a meaningful difference? And so that's one of the things to keep in mind as you're looking and you're doing your research is, are these differences or are these numbers actually meaningful, or is it kind of just telling me what I already know? So overall, the findings, we put together this findings report is, again, something very light to say, what are the things that we came out of this research with, and what are we going to do with it? So the first thing was work-life balance. For there are pros and there are cons to working from mobile. Mobile enables you to be accessible at off hours. Mobile also allows you to be accessible at off hours. And so that can go either way. We didn't want to necessarily encourage people to be working around the clock, but if that's what you needed to do for your particular business, we wanted to enable you to work best for however worked for you. Speed and efficiency were, again, other things that we heard. And like I mentioned before, that access to information was so, so crucial for people. And that's something that was a really big gap for them right now. Being able to take notes within the app was also a very large part of their workflow. Again, because they potentially were missing some pieces of information that would enable them to respond, being able to write notes now that they could go back to later were actually very helpful for them in kind of filling and closing that gap, or at least mitigating some of that gap in being able to write notes that either they could use or their teammate could use when they were actually able to respond to the conversation. One of the things that we were also curious about was restrictions, and did companies have restrictions on their employees accessing conversations from a mobile device? When I worked in financial services, there was a very big regulation, and the companies were very cautious of what you had access to when you were outside of the office. And so that was a thing where if that was at play for us, that's something that we should know and understand, like, hey, maybe this subset of users or this subset of company customers within this company demographic may not actually be able to use it. So when we don't see usage, we shouldn't necessarily try to get usage. Like, there's a very clear reason why they are not using. And so that was something that we were interested in understanding was, are these regulations very prevalent? And frankly, they weren't, which was good for us. The next thing, again, specific features enable or would enable improved mobile experience. So again, there were things that were just generally missing that would help people feel more confident in using the apps that they just weren't getting. And then the last point was that mobile actually, as much as people said that they wanted to use it, when we asked them, like, what percentage of your time would you be using it, it really wasn't that much of their workday that they were intending to use their mobile device. So while there were things that were missing, it wasn't necessarily hindering the large portion. There were a subset of users who were, but for the most part, people weren't necessarily using their mobile device. So if we think about, maybe some of you all work from home and you have Slack on your phone, while Slack on your phone is super helpful, it's not necessarily that you're on Slack on your phone all day long. So if it didn't exist or was missing some features, it may not hinder you from doing your day-to-day, but it would be a little bit less convenient. So that's what we were seeing, is that while it was important, it wasn't necessarily detracting from some things. So that was the research that we did and the findings that we pulled together. We presented this to our team. We presented it to the rest of the product teams, just so that people could have a shared understanding of who we were dealing with and what we were working towards when we pulled these personas together. So one thing that you may have noticed or may not have noticed, it's fine, with this persona is that there were no solutions included in here. We called out potentially a lot of pains and a lot of opportunities, but we didn't solution. And that's because that's not the point. The point of personas is not necessarily to come up with new features or new solutions for people. It's really just to understand who they are and what they need. Solutioning in this situation is an entirely different exercise. And so we completely left that out of this. What it did help us do was just create a general and collective understanding amongst the team of who the customer was and who the product was best suited to serve. And that's really what we were trying to understand. And in doing that, it improved our ability to identify and prioritize features. So one of the things that we did coming out of this research was, one, when we heard that there was context was missing and people were really looking for that context in order to be able to respond effectively. Again, that whole, what's my order number, what's my shipping status, that type of stuff. That was something that we prioritized immediately, was figuring out what are some new features that we can build around this idea of context. And so we set a theme on our roadmap that probably lasted 6 months to a year around adding more context for users. So that included adding previous conversations so they could see the history of things that they talked about or that were talked about with this customer. We added customer information, like where they were located, what their email address was, if they had a phone number, or what their preferences were on being contacted. Those types of information we started adding in incrementally to the product now that we understood what people needed and what was keeping them from doing that. Another thing that we better understood was kind of who was using it and who needed to be on the app and who didn't. And so what we were seeing, again, with these smaller teams, sometimes those teams were literally never at a desktop. So we would hear different things from those teams or those users than we would from larger scale teams. Again, think about a plumber, for example. A plumber is literally never going to be at his computer ever. And so if we had features where customers would be contacting him and he could only respond, or she could only respond to that customer via their desktop, they would never be able to respond to their customers. And so we did talk to a plumber. And that's a real example. That's the one that always stuck with me is, every conversation that I miss is a business loss, is a business deal loss. And that actually really stuck for us because, again, we're here to enable you to reach your customers. And by not enabling them to contact their customers quickly, we were actually taking away business from that particular person. So that's the person, think about a home cleaning service, again, not going to be in front of a computer. So how do we enable some of these features to help those people? So again, adding this context, adding new features, adding chat, so people could in real time have these conversations was really important for many of our mobile users. It also helped us deprioritize some features that we realized were not going to be meeting the needs of this use case. So for example, we added some new AI features on web. One of them was summarizing conversations. That on a mobile device is actually great. If you had a 27 thread conversation, that's a lot to be scrolling through on a small screen. If we can give you 5 bullets of a summary, that's actually very, very helpful for a mobile user. In contrast, we had the opportunity to compose conversations for users using AI, and we decided to deprioritize that feature. And it's not that we didn't necessarily think that people wanted to compose or have AI help them compose their conversations. It's that there was no way to fact check that. So because the mobile app was missing some of these areas that they would be able to validate, again, what's my order number? If we don't have order number in there and AI has generated this order number, is that true? Is it not? There's no way for a user on their mobile device to validate this information before they click send. So we're not really giving them the confidence that what they're going to send this customer is accurate. And so we chose to deprioritize that feature until other features were built first that would better support that. And so that's kind of how we chose to use this persona, was to guide our thinking and guide our understanding of what customers needed and what they didn't. And then the last thing, really, it made team consensus much easier. When everybody understood who we were building for, what we were building and why, and we're able to go back to that persona and say, yes, I remember that, we heard this quite a bit from customers. It built that consensus amongst the team and made a lot of our decisions about what to prioritize or deprioritize faster because everyone had the same understanding of who the users were. So that's a little bit about personas, how we use them. I'm going to stop there. I think that's the last slide. Yeah, that's the last slide that I had for y'all. So that's, again, real life example of how personas can be used. I personally find them very, very useful in understanding just generally who you're talking to, who you're building for. But just starting by talking to people within your user base really helps you craft and understand maybe there's multiple personas that you're building for or that are using your product that you might build for and you might build for separately. Again, that reporting use case for the manager was something that was a manager only thing. The customer support representative did not care about that. So those are things that you would have to balance and understand whose use case here is actually most important for me to be building for. So I'll stop there. That was a bit of a long talk, but happy to take any questions or follow up on any points that may have been confusing.
And if you guys do have questions, just so we're not talking over one another, let's ask through the chat, and we can monitor those. Looks like we have a few already.
Okay, so let's see. How sticky do personas stay amongst the product dev teams in your experience? One thing I notice is how quickly they're dropped and left behind. Yes, that's very, very true. And so that has been my experience as well, in that they're great once you build them, and then we go off and start doing other things. And so one of the things that I have found helpful, we never, I think at Pluralsight, we had specific names, company-wide names for the personas that we literally probably never referred to these people ever. And frankly, within our team, the mobile team, we didn't ever say, Marvin needs blah, 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 or Robin needs blah. We never actually did that. But the learnings that came out of it did come up often, and saying, because we set our theme for the roadmap around what we needed, what that user needed. So again, like I said, there was like 6 to 12 months where the theme was adding context for users. That was a way that we could constantly come back to, this is what the customer needs, without actually saying, I don't even remember, Marvin needs more context. And these are some of the things that we're building for. It was, what can we pull out of that to apply to our roadmap? So definitely hear you on that one. The persona itself kind of falls by the wayside, but if we can come back to the learnings that we had from that and generate some sticking points for the teams, or anchor them to a mission or whatever it might be. And again, it might be something that you have to continuously come back to every 2 years, just to make sure the persona is still fresh. But what has helped me is pulling out the learnings and anchoring to that rather than the persona itself. Let's see. Next question. Describe how development product teams practically use personas in their work. How much do developers depend on the personas during their work? Right. So again, the personas really served as an anchoring point, or maybe a conversation point, as far as understanding what we were building and why. So everyone literally on the team was included in the research in some way. So when we did customer calls, the designer and I generally led the conversations, but all of the engineers were enabled. They were allowed to, as their schedule permitted, could come in and sit in on the conversation. And the reason for that was, as a product person, I don't want to always be the mouthpiece for the customer. Like, I would rather just if an engineer was able to hear and talk to that customer themselves. So if they had questions or follow-up questions for the customer, they were welcome to ask those directly. So the engineers were definitely part of the customer interview process. When we got into some of the data digging, that maybe less so. But once that final findings presentation was put together. So the designer did a really great job of putting together a presentation that was presented to our team first. We had a conversation about it. We discussed it. People poked holes in where they were, maybe thought they disagreed, or they heard something different, or they felt like there was something to anchor to. So the engineering teams were definitely part of various processes, or various parts of the process in developing it, and then later on in understanding how we were going to use it. Next question. Besides focusing on solutions while creating personas, are there other common mistakes that make this process less effective? Yep. So one being the original point about them not being sticky. I would say that's probably another one of the common mistakes, is doing this whole persona. The thing looks great. You've come up with names and pictures and all of this stuff. You generate it and it just becomes an artifact. That's one thing that I would say is kind of a mistake, or an area where personas don't go well. The other one that I would say is not taking the time to talk to enough people. And so if you talk to 2 or 3, then you start to take these 2 or 3 people and generalize their experience to all of your customers, and that may not be Correct. Again, that said, how many customers is appropriate is going to be a bit subjective to your process, to how much time you have, to, how in depth you want these personas to be. If you already have a persona and you're trying to update it, like it may be dependent on many things, but not talking to enough people and then using a very small subset to generalize across all of your users might not be good. For example, we went into this research thinking we were going to come out with one persona, and we were generally thinking that it was the customer representative, not even thinking that there was an entirely different need for the customer support manager. And we started hearing it to the point where we're like, we actually need to separate these because they actually do have two different use cases. So while yes, they are both in the queue, yes, they potentially are both responding to customers, they actually have two very different views of how they would be using this product, and we should separate those. So that was not the intention going into the research, but had we not talked to enough people, we would kind of just loop those all into one and entirely ignored the second use case around, reporting and simplifying and summarizing and all of that type of stuff. So I would say those are maybe two additional missteps that could come up with developing personas. We've talked about personas and how you create them. How do you actually use them day to day to create value? Yeah, again, so personas, again, it's not necessarily every day that we're using them, but it did help in my experience, it has helped in shaping and crafting where you're going and who you're building for. So again, we pulled out some learnings and created themes from those, and we were able to go back and say, yes, this is a theme that we are addressing, or this is a pain point that we are addressing for this particular persona that we know is a frequent user, and these are the things that they're looking for. We've heard it from many customers. We validated that by just looking at the conversations that are coming in the queue, hearing things that customers have told us directly, hearing what sales has told us directly. So those were things that it wasn't necessarily that we were going back to the persona, in our weekly sprint planning or anything like that. But maybe quarterly, we're going back and saying, hey, did we solve this problem yet for this user? How have we addressed or, in some way made progress towards addressing this particular pain point or goal or need or opportunity for this customer? So the persona really opened up the door for us, and what are the opportunities that we should be solving for. While the persona, we didn't address it every day, we did go back and see what are these opportunities and how should we be addressing them, whether that was in quarterly planning or at road mapping or prioritizing features, whatever it may be. Let's see, qualitative research, was it mostly user interviews or did you visit customers? Yep, that's great. Observe them using the tool. Perfect. I love this question. So as far as qualitative research for this, we did not do any in-person stuff. We did this at like the height of COVID. So that was a hard no. But we did actually ask customers to take us through, while we were doing some of these customer interviews, take us through some of the features that you're using and what you might be doing at what particular time. So we also did, so many of these were live interviews, like Zoom interviews. There were a set of customers who were not able to join the live Zoom, just maybe because of time zone or whatever it may be. But they did opt to send us responses in text, so via email. And so we gathered some information that way. But for the most part, the user interviews for this were just over Zoom. We would ask them a set of questions. We would then have them share with us, what you were doing, when would you be doing that, and why. So that was one of the things that we did do. In the past, I have observed customers in person, like literally sat by them for 2 or 3 hours in their day and just ignore me, pretend like I'm not here and just do whatever you do. I have done that, but for this particular research, that just wasn't possible for a few reasons. During user testing, how close were your actual user testers to your hypothesized personas? I would say the customer support manager persona was pretty accurate. I would say the customer representative, it blended several different types. So like I said, there's the customer support person, and then there was also like the engineer who responded to customer support questions. So they weren't necessarily like a trained customer support person. They just happened to be responding to customers often. So I would say that persona kind of got a little muddled, as it didn't feel materially different enough to separate that into two more personas. So like essentially having three personas, it didn't feel important enough, the differences, to create an entirely new persona, but we did have to kind of blend um uh the engineer non-support person with the actual support person for simplicity. But we felt that the needs were similar enough that it didn't like entirely muddy who this person was. Users, descriptive names for personas. Worried Wade. Okay, so this is more of just feedback. Okay. Hannah, any tips in facilitating cross-functional workshops to define or revisit outdated personas? Yeah. So tips on facilitating these workshops. One thing that I found helpful in this process was, as much as it was realistic and reasonable, including people in the actual interview process or in the actual speaking to customers. Because again, there's the speaking to customers part, generating all of that qualitative data. And then there's the quantitative piece where we're digging through metrics and usage analytics and all of that type of stuff. That to me felt potentially less necessary to include everyone on the team, maybe the data analyst, to say, hey, let's make sure that I'm not interpreting this information wrong. But the actual speaking to people, there's a lot to be gained from just hearing things yourself. And as much as I wrote, we wrote down all the information and they were recorded, there is something different about being able to speak to someone and asking your own follow-up questions. And so that's, again, it's not always going to be possible. And I'm also not recommending to have 75 people on this call with this one customer, because that's also not it. But if you have an engineers or designers or some people that are very close to the work and you would like to include them in the process of just getting the information, I would say, maybe one or two additional people on the Zoom call to hear from the customer. If they have an additional question, they're welcome to ask the customer directly. I think that has done wonders in building an understanding, and where everyone has their own lived experience in hearing this information, as opposed to, hey, I did all of this research and I'm presenting you with the findings, and then now the team is supposed to operate using that. So that's one thing that I found, if it's possible, is really, really helpful. If you're then just updating something that is outdated, again, maybe you don't have to do as extensive research unless you're starting to find like, hey, these needs are no longer relevant, or, we added that context and we got great feedback from customers, and we, made the navigating through the app more efficient, and, we validated all of these things. If that's the case and you're like, hey, I need to refresh because these are no longer issues, or these issues have been resolved, it might require, again, another round of maybe heavier research. Those two personas are, in this case, we're probably always going to exist. In your situation, it might be new personas that you're going after. Maybe the business has changed direction and you're like, hey, we're actually not focused on the customer support manager anymore. We're changing directions and we're going somewhere else. That could be a catalyst for having to refresh your personas, and one might not be relevant anymore. In our case, these personas were likely always going to be the people, but their needs may have changed. And so that might be the area where you focus on, is like, how have the needs changed? How have the opportunities changed? Technology is changing. How does AI impact their workflow? How do they feel about it? What can we update or learn from that? So that might be those might be smaller things that you would need to look for, as opposed to who are the people that I'm building for, because that's where we started. I had no idea who the people were, and that might not be the case when you're updating a persona. You might have an idea of who they are, and maybe you just need to focus on a smaller subset of their needs and their goals, as that may have changed as your product has evolved or the universe has evolved, whatever. Again, COVID changed a lot of things for our customers. So maybe there's an external driver that's causing you to say, hey, our customer needs seem to be changing. We don't seem to be in tune with them anymore. Let's come back and revisit. That could be a catalyst. So I'd say, making sure if it's the first round, making sure as many of the people who are going to be actually building the product understand who you're building for, and getting them in there. If this is an update, getting the people who are relevant. Maybe there's, you have a customer support person, one person pulled in, hey, these are some new things that I've been hearing. A salesperson, hey, these are some new things that I've been hearing, and starting to pull those in. And it might be a different flavor of research than you did the first time. So I guess understanding why you're revisiting it would be the first thing, and then kind of going from there.
All right, looks like we have one more question.
We just have to be smart with that. Yep, exactly, Craig. You said there was one more question.
No, that was it.
That was it. Okay, yep. Yeah.
Anyways, no, this has been great. Thank you so much for giving us your time, Keisha. It's been very helpful and yeah, very, very insightful. Everyone, the recording for this Zoom has been recorded. We'll get it posted somewhere, probably in the Slack channel in the next week or so. And Keisha, I'll send it to you as well. Thanks to everybody who attended this. It's been really great. Yeah, I'll let you know once that recording gets posted.
Great.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, y'all. It's been fun. Have a good one.